On May 11, 1939, faced with the harsh weather and the formidable Soviet army during the Battle of Khalkhin Gol, Japan suffered a significant blow, severely dampening the morale of its forces. Consequently, Japan shifted its focus southward, seeking new strategic opportunities and territorial expansion. On August 23 of the same year, the Soviet Union and Germany signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, expressing mutual non-aggression but harboring ambitions for territorial expansion in Europe. This pact raised concerns for Japan, fearing Soviet deployment of main forces to the Far East to counter Japanese advances. Simultaneously, to avoid further conflicts in the Far East, Japan and the Soviet Union signed a temporary ceasefire agreement in October of the same year. This accord contributed to a relatively stable situation in northern Japan. By May 10, 1940, Germany had occupied the homelands of France and the Netherlands, leading to the exile of their respective governments overseas. The overseas colonies of French Indochina became subject to the puppet regime of Vichy France. In the southern Dutch East Indies, there was a certain degree of acknowledgement of the dominant position of the United Kingdom and the United States. For Japan, France seemed like an easily obtainable target, with French Indochina being the ripe fruit. Occupying French Indochina would also help prevent the flow of supplies to China from various countries, thus hastening the end of the war in China. After all, Japan had initially boasted about defeating China within 3 months. As a result, Japan took decisive action, coercing Vichy France into agreeing to allow Japanese troops to enter the northern part of French Indochina. However, this move drew dissatisfaction from the United States, which engaged in multiple negotiations, hoping for Japan to withdraw its forces from China and French Indochina. The US even proposed joint action with the United Kingdom to blockade Japan, but this was not agreed upon. Japan remained vigilant against US territorial and military expansion in the Pacific and Asia, especially witnessing the annexation of islands like Hawaii and the Philippines, considered close to or within its sphere of influence. On July 20, 1940, the U.S. State Department issued a moral embargo statement, imposing a supply embargo on aviation gasoline. While this declaration did not have an immediate impact on Japan, it served as a warning that Japan might face the risk of a U.S. oil embargo. Paradoxically, this further stimulated Japan's expansionist desires. By September, having witnessed Germany's sweeping victories in Europe, Japan gained confidence in Germany's military strength and believed that Germany had a chance of winning the war. Therefore, Japan signed the tripartite pact with Germany and Italy, strengthening military cooperation among the three countries and jointly pursuing their respective geopolitical goals. This also marked a significant diplomatic victory for Japan in its expansion process in Asia, further securing its position in French colonies through the alliance with Germany. At this point, Japan can be considered to have essentially secured the French colonial territory. At the same time, Japan faced another choice in its expansion process, namely, whether to continue the northern expansion by attacking the Soviet Union. This decision not only had the potential to avoid conflicts with British and American colonies, but also to capitalize on their aversion to the Soviet Union and communism. Simultaneously, the option of exploiting the abundant resources in Siberia to sustain wartime economy became a feasible alternative. However, within the Japanese ruling group, the majority believed that even if they were to occupy a part of the Soviet Far East, it would be challenging to ensure access to the necessary strategic materials. Resources such as oil, non-ferrous metals, and rubber, crucial for Japan, were mainly located in Southeast Asia. Engaging in a war with the Soviet Union would make Japan more dependent on the United States and Britain, as they controlled the sources of these materials. Meanwhile, with the Soviet army engaged by the German forces, France having surrendered, the Netherlands occupied, and Britain deeply involved in the European theater, the opportune moment had arrived for Japan to occupy the Southeast Asian colonies of Britain, France, and the Netherlands. By directly controlling the required raw materials, Japan hoped to seize a rare opportunity to free itself from dependency on others for its raw material supply. There is a perspective circulating in Japan that the encouragement for Japan to attack the Soviet Union by the Allies, particularly the United States and Britain, is a strategy aimed at weakening Japan through indirect means and eventually delivering a fatal blow. Consequently, in response to this perceived threat, the Japanese Imperial Conference announced the policy of accelerated southern expansion. By April 13, 1941, Japan and the Soviet Union had signed the Soviet-Japanese Neutrality Pact. In this agreement, the Soviet Union pledged to respect the territorial integrity and inviolability of Manchukuo, while Japan guaranteed the same for the Mongolian People's Republic. The contentious aspect of this treaty was the mutual recognition of each other's territorial rights in China. At this time, the United States grew increasingly dissatisfied with Japan's actions. Japan had already threatened Southeast Asia directly by blockading the southeastern coast of China and annexing French colonies. The U.S. realized that if no action was taken, Japan might establish dominance in the Far East. In this scenario, the U.S. felt an urgent need to protect its interests in the Asia-Pacific region. Japan was gradually posing a threat to the dominant position in the Far East, positioning itself to become the region's hegemon. As Japan's demand for oil increased significantly, and with limited domestic oil reserves, it had to rely on shale oil as a supplement. However, the fuel produced from shale oil was less efficient than traditional petroleum. Consequently, Japan became highly dependent on imported oil. In 1939, 70% of Japan's imported oil came from the United States, with the remainder sourced from the Dutch East Indies. Meanwhile, the United Kingdom, preoccupied with the European theater of war, was not prioritizing Japan. The UK hoped for a firm US policy against Japan, as a significant portion of Japan's oil imports originated from the United States. On July 26, 1941, President Franklin D. Roosevelt signed an executive order freezing all of Japan's assets in the United States and imposing a comprehensive ban on exporting oil to Japan. This swift action led to a drastic reduction in Japan's oil supply, resulting in a 93% loss. Almost instantly, the close trade partnership between the two nations turned into a hostile relationship. The U.S. implemented the embargo intending to curb Japanese aggression in China and other areas and to compel withdrawal. But this inadvertently escalated Japan's military actions, leading to the attack on Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941. Even without the embargo, deep-seated U.S.-Japan tensions might have still led to conflict. I deeply appreciate your support. If you enjoy my content, please make sure to subscribe to my YouTube channel for more exciting videos. Thank you all.